I want to begin with something that might seem a bit surprising, maybe even controversial to some. But I've spent over 3 decades studying the human body, working with patients, teaching medical students, and conducting research on aging. And if there's one thing I've learned that I wish more people understood, it's this. Your legs do not get weak simply because you got older. Now, I realize that might sound strange at first. After all, we've all seen it happen. We've watched our parents or grandparents slow down. We've noticed changes in our own bodies as the years pass. And the cultural message is everywhere, isn't it? Well, you're getting older. What do you expect? You hear it from friends, sometimes from family, occasionally even from healthcare providers who mean well but may not have the full picture. But here's what the research actually shows us, and this is based on decades of work from universities and medical institutions around the world. Aging, by itself, is not the primary driver of muscle weakness in the legs. It's not the number on your birth certificate that determines whether you can climb stairs comfortably, walk through a grocery store without fatigue, or get up from a chair without struggling. The calendar is not your enemy here. What actually happens is far more specific and far more addressable than most people realize. There are particular changes that occur in the body, changes in how your nervous system communicates with your muscles, changes in how your body processes and uses the nutrients you consume, changes in circulation and cellular energy production. These changes are what lead to weakness. And critically, these changes are not inevitable consequences of simply being alive for more years. I want you to really sit with that for a moment, because I understand it goes against what many of us have been told our entire lives. But the science is clear. Researchers have studied populations of older adults who maintain remarkable strength and mobility into their 70s, 80s, and beyond. These aren't genetic anomalies or superhuman athletes. They're regular people whose bodies have managed to preserve or restore the specific functions that keep muscles strong and responsive. So if you're watching this and you've noticed your legs feeling weaker, less reliable, more tired than they used to be, I want you to ask yourself something. Have you been assuming this is just what happens with age? Have you been accepting weakness as though it were written in stone? Because if so, you may be accepting something that isn't actually true. And in doing so, you may be missing an opportunity to address what's really going on. That's what we're going to explore together in this video. We're going to look at the actual mechanisms behind leg weakness in older adults. We're going to understand why the standard advice doesn't always work the way people expect it to. And we're going to discuss what the evidence tells us about restoring strength and function, even later in life. My goal here isn't to sell you anything or make promises I can't keep. My goal is simply to share with you what I've learned over 30 years in a way that respects your intelligence and your experience. So let's begin by looking at what's actually happening inside the body when the legs start to weaken. When most people think about muscle weakness, they imagine the muscles themselves getting smaller or somehow deteriorating. And while that can be part of the picture, it's not where the problem usually starts. The process begins somewhere else entirely, and understanding this is essential if we want to address it effectively. Your muscles don't work in isolation. They work because your nervous system tells them to. Every time you take a step, stand up from a chair, or shift your weight while walking, your brain is sending electrical signals down through your spinal cord and out through specialized nerves to the muscles in your legs. These signals tell the muscle fibers when to contract, how strongly to contract, and how to coordinate with other muscles to produce smooth, controlled movement. This communication system is extraordinarily sophisticated, And like any sophisticated system, it requires maintenance. It requires use. And when certain conditions aren't met, it starts to become less efficient. What researchers have observed is that as we get older, there can be a gradual decline in what's called neuromuscular signaling. The connection between the nervous system and the muscles begins to weaken. The signals don't travel as quickly, they don't arrive as clearly. The nerve endings that connect to muscle fibers may become less numerous or less active. This isn't because of age in some abstract sense. It's because of specific biological changes that can be influenced by how we live, how we move, and how we nourish our bodies. Think of it like this. Imagine you have a telephone system connecting two offices. For years, the lines work perfectly. Calls go through instantly, voices are clear, and communication is seamless. But over time, if those lines aren't maintained, if nobody checks the connections, if the wires start to corrode or the equipment becomes outdated, the calls become harder to make. There's static on the line. Sometimes calls don't connect at all. The offices are still there. The phones still work in theory. But the communication system between them has degraded. That's similar to what happens between your brain and your leg muscles. The muscles themselves may still have significant capacity, but if the signals telling them to activate are weak, delayed, or inconsistent, the muscles don't function properly. You feel weakness not because your muscles have failed, but because the instructions they're receiving have become unclear. Now, this is just one piece of the puzzle. There's also something happening at the cellular level inside the muscles themselves. Your muscles are constantly in a state of turnover. They're breaking down old proteins and building new ones. This is normal and healthy. It's how muscles repair themselves, adapt to demands, and maintain their structure over time. But this process depends on your body's ability to sense that new proteins are needed and then actually synthesize them from the nutrients you consume. Here's where things get more complicated. As we age, many people experience what scientists call reduced muscle protein sensitivity. What this means is that even when you eat adequate protein, your muscles may not respond to it the same way they did when you were younger. The signals that tell your muscle cells to uptake amino acids and build new tissue become dampened. It's as if your muscles have become partially deaf to the instruction to grow and repair. This is a crucial point, and we'll come back to it later when we discuss why conventional advice sometimes falls short. But for now, understand that the problem isn't necessarily a lack of protein in the diet. The problem is often that the muscles aren't responding to that protein the way they should. There's another factor worth mentioning, and that's circulation. Your muscles need blood flow. Blood delivers oxygen, nutrients, and signaling molecules that keep muscle tissue healthy and functional. Blood also carries away waste products from cellular metabolism. When circulation is reduced, whether due to cardiovascular changes, prolonged sitting, or other factors, the muscles don't receive what they need to thrive. Over time, this contributes to weakness and loss of function. And then there's what I call the inactivity feedback loop. This is perhaps one of the most important concepts to understand, because it explains why weakness often accelerates once it begins. When your legs start to feel weak, when walking becomes more tiring or stairs become more challenging, the natural response is to do less. You sit more. You avoid activities that feel difficult. You rest believing you're protecting yourself. And in some ways you are. Rest is important. But prolonged inactivity sends a powerful signal to your body. That signal essentially says, we don't need these muscles. We're not using them. We can let them go. And so the body does exactly that. It reduces investment in maintaining the muscle tissue you're not using. The neuromuscular connections weaken further. Circulation decreases. Muscle protein synthesis slows down even more. And within weeks or months, you've lost a significant amount of function, not because of aging itself, but because of this cycle of disuse. The good news, and this is where I want to offer some real hope, is that this process is not permanent. These changes are not carved in stone. Neuromuscular connections can be strengthened. Muscle protein sensitivity can be improved. Circulation can be enhanced. The feedback loop can be reversed. It takes understanding and it takes consistent effort, but it is absolutely possible, even for people in their 70s, 80s, or beyond. Now, let me address something that frustrates many older adults, and frankly, something that frustrates me as a physician and researcher. There's a lot of well-meaning advice out there about maintaining strength as you age. Eat more protein, get more exercise, stay active. These recommendations aren't wrong exactly, but they're incomplete, and when they don't work the way people expect, it can lead to discouragement and resignation. Let me explain why standard advice often falls short after the age of 60. First, let's talk about protein. You've probably heard that older adults need protein to maintain muscle mass. And that's true. But here's what people often don't understand. It's not just about how much protein you eat. It's about whether your muscles can actually use that protein. Remember what I mentioned earlier about muscle protein sensitivity? This phenomenon, often called anabolic resistance in scientific literature, means that your muscles require a stronger signal to initiate the muscle building process. When you were younger, a moderate amount of protein would trigger a robust response. Your muscles would readily take up amino acids and synthesize new tissue. But as this sensitivity declines, the same amount of protein produces a much smaller response. This is why someone can eat what seems like adequate protein and still experience muscle loss. Their body isn't utilizing that protein efficiently. It's passing through without doing its job. So simply telling someone to eat more protein without addressing the underlying sensitivity issue is like turning up the volume on a radio with poor reception. You might get a little more sound, but you're not fixing the real problem. Inflammation plays a role here too, and I want to explain this carefully because inflammation is often misunderstood. We tend to think of inflammation as something that happens when you injure yourself, cut your finger, or catch a cold. Your body mounts an inflammatory response to deal with the problem, and then the inflammation resolves. But there's another type of inflammation that's much more subtle. Scientists sometimes call it chronic low-grade inflammation, and it becomes more common as we age. You don't feel it the way you'd feel a swollen ankle. It's not painful or obvious. But at the cellular level, inflammatory signals are circulating through your body, affecting how your cells function. This chronic inflammation interferes with muscle protein synthesis. It makes the muscles even less responsive to the amino acids they receive. It also affects the nervous system, potentially contributing to the signaling problems we discussed earlier. And it influences how efficiently your body produces energy at the cellular level. So, if someone has elevated levels of chronic inflammation, simply eating more protein or exercising more won't fully address the problem. They need to address the inflammatory environment as well. Then there's the issue of nutrient absorption. Your digestive system changes as you age. The stomach may produce less acid, which is necessary for breaking down proteins and absorbing certain minerals. The intestinal lining may become less efficient at absorbing nutrients. The balance of bacteria in your gut may shift in ways that affect nutrient processing. All of this means that even if you're eating the right foods in the right amounts, your body may not be extracting the full value from them. I see this frequently in clinical practice. A patient comes in, shows me their diet, and it looks reasonable on paper. But when we look at their actual nutrient status, they're deficient in key areas. The food is going in, but the nutrients aren't being properly absorbed and utilized. Exercise presents its own challenges. I'm a strong believer in physical activity for older adults. The evidence supporting it is overwhelming. But the type of exercise matters, and so does the approach. When people hear exercise, they often think of what worked for them decades ago. Maybe they used to run or do aerobics or lift weights in a certain way, but their bodies have changed. Their joints may not tolerate the same stresses. Their recovery time is longer. Their risk of injury is higher if they push too hard too fast. And if they get injured and have to stop exercising, they fall right back into that inactivity feedback loop we discussed. So telling someone to just exercise more without providing guidance on appropriate intensity, frequency, and progression can actually backfire. They may hurt themselves, or they may do exercises that aren't particularly effective for addressing neuromuscular decline. I want to be clear that I'm not criticizing anyone here, not doctors, not trainers, not the people who give this advice. Most of it comes from a good place. But we need a more nuanced understanding of what's happening in older bodies and what kinds of interventions actually address the root causes of weakness. This brings us to the question of what actually helps. What does the evidence tell us about restoring strength and function in older adults? Let me share some principles that I've seen make a real difference, both in research settings and in clinical practice. The first principle is that consistency matters more than intensity. This is counterintuitive for many people. We live in a culture that celebrates intense effort, pushing through pain, going hard. But for older adults, particularly those who are already experiencing weakness, this approach is often counterproductive. What works better is regular, moderate activity that can be sustained over time. I'm talking about daily movement that challenges the muscles enough to send a signal, enough to tell the body that these muscles are needed and should be maintained, but not so much that it causes injury or excessive fatigue that prevents you from continuing. Research from multiple institutions has shown that older adults who engage in consistent, moderate resistance activities maintain better muscle function than those who exercise intensely but sporadically. The body responds to regular signals. It adapts to consistent demand. One hard workout per week, followed by days of inactivity, doesn't send the same message as gentle daily movement. The second principle involves timing, particularly the timing of nutrition around activity. There's good evidence that consuming protein shortly after physical activity enhances muscle protein synthesis, even in older adults with some degree of anabolic resistance. The muscles seem to be more receptive during this window. They're primed to use the amino acids that become available. This doesn't mean you need to obsess over eating protein within minutes of exercising. But there does seem to be a general benefit to having a protein-containing meal within a few hours of physical activity. It helps optimize the muscle's response and get more value from both the exercise and the nutrition. The third principle relates to the quality and digestibility of your food. Given that absorption can be an issue for older adults, it makes sense to choose foods that are easier for your body to break down and utilize. This might mean cooking foods thoroughly, choosing preparations that enhance digestibility, eating slowly, and chewing thoroughly, and paying attention to how different foods make you feel. Some people find that they absorb nutrients better from certain food sources than others. This can be individual. What works well for one person may not work as well for another. The key is to pay attention to your body and notice whether your dietary choices seem to be producing the results you'd expect. Circulation is another area where targeted strategies can help. Simple activities that promote blood flow to the legs, such as walking, gentle cycling, even ankle movements and calf raises while seated, can enhance the delivery of oxygen and nutrients to muscle tissue. Temperature can also play a role. Keeping the legs warm, avoiding prolonged cold exposure, can help maintain good blood flow. Perhaps most importantly, there's the matter of nervous system support. Remember that the weakness often begins with degraded signaling between the brain and muscles. Activities that challenge coordination and balance, that require the nervous system to actively engage with the muscles, seem to help preserve and even improve these connections. This is why certain types of movement are more beneficial than others for older adults. Exercises that involve coordination, that require you to think about what you're doing, that challenge your balance in safe ways. These stimulate the neuromuscular system in ways that simple repetitive motions may not. Activities like controlled standing on one leg, slow and deliberate step-ups, reaching movements that require stabilization, all of these engage the neural pathways that keep the muscles connected and responsive. There's also growing interest in what researchers call mind-muscle connection, the practice of consciously focusing attention on the muscles you're using during movement. Studies suggest that this focused attention can enhance the signaling between brain and muscle, potentially improving outcomes from exercise. It's a simple concept. Think about the muscles you're working. Feel them contracting. Be present in the movement rather than distracted. This isn't mystical, it's neurological. Focused attention seems to strengthen the neural pathways involved. I should also mention the importance of sleep and stress management, though these topics deserve their own discussions. Poor sleep interferes with muscle recovery and repair. Chronic stress elevates inflammatory markers and disrupts hormonal patterns that affect muscle maintenance. Addressing these areas, while sometimes overlooked in conversations about physical strength, can have meaningful effects on outcomes. Now, I want to offer some reassurance because I know that some of you watching this may be feeling overwhelmed. There's a lot to consider, and it might seem like maintaining strength requires a complicated regimen of precise timing, specific activities, and careful attention to multiple factors. But here's what I want you to take away. You don't need to do everything perfectly. You don't need to optimize every variable. What matters is moving in the right direction, consistently, over time. I've worked with patients who started from very compromised positions, people who had significant weakness, who hadn't exercised in years, who had multiple health conditions complicating their situation, and I've seen many of them improve. Sometimes the improvement is dramatic. Sometimes it's modest, but meaningful. Either way, it happens because the body retains the capacity to adapt and respond even at advanced ages. There's a study I think of often. Researchers worked with a group of adults in their 80s and 90s, people who would typically be written off as too old to benefit from physical training. They put these individuals on a carefully designed program of resistance exercises. And what happened was remarkable. Within just a few months, many participants showed significant improvements in leg strength. Some who had been using walkers were able to walk more independently. Some who couldn't rise from a chair without assistance regained that ability. Now, I'm not telling you this to suggest that results are guaranteed, or that everyone will experience the same degree of improvement. Bodies vary. Health situations differ. But what this research shows is that the potential is there. The muscles of an 80-year-old still respond to the right signals. The nervous system can still adapt. The capacity for improvement isn't extinguished by age. What I've seen hold people back is not their age, but their beliefs about their age. When someone is convinced that weakness is inevitable, that their body is permanently declining, they often don't even try. Or they try half-heartedly, expecting failure. That expectation becomes self-fulfilling. They don't put in consistent effort because they don't believe it will work. And then when it doesn't work, they feel confirmed in their belief. But when someone approaches this with curiosity, with patience, with an understanding that improvement is possible but gradual, the outcomes are often much better. They make small changes and stick with them. They notice small improvements that motivate further effort. They build momentum. And over months and years, they maintain a level of function that dramatically exceeds what they might have experienced if they'd simply accepted decline as inevitable. I also want to speak to the families watching this. Those of you who are here because you're concerned about a parent, a spouse, a loved one. Your support matters enormously. Encouraging without pressuring, assisting without creating dependency, believing in someone's capacity to improve while respecting their limits, these are meaningful contributions. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give an older adult is the message that they are not helpless, that their body still works, that improvement is possible, that they are not defined by their limitations, but by their choices. That message, conveyed with patience and respect, can change everything. Let me say a word about safety, because this is important. I've been emphasizing that improvement is possible, but I want to be clear that the path to improvement should be gradual and carefully managed. Particularly for those with significant weakness, balance issues, or other health conditions, new activities should be approached thoughtfully. Starting slowly is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of wisdom. Protecting yourself from falls and injuries is essential, because a serious injury can set you back dramatically and sometimes permanently. The goal is sustainable progress. It's better to do a little bit consistently for months and years than to push too hard and end up unable to continue. Patience is a virtue here. Your body will respond to the signals you send it, but it responds over time, not overnight. And through all of this, I want you to hold on to what really matters, which is not the number on some strength test or the definition in your muscles. What matters is your quality of life. Can you do the things you want to do? Can you maintain your independence? Can you live with dignity and engagement, participating in the activities and relationships that give your life meaning? Strong legs are a means to those ends. They're valuable because they allow you to move through the world on your own terms. They keep you safe from falls that could rob you of your independence. They give you the freedom to be active in whatever ways matter to you. That's what we're working toward, not some abstract ideal of fitness, but a life fully lived. As we come to the end of our time together, I want to leave you with a few thoughts. First, don't accept the story that weakness is inevitable. The research doesn't support it, and more importantly, accepting that story robs you of agency. You have more influence over your body's trajectory than you might have believed. Second, understand that the changes behind weakness are specific and addressable. Neuromuscular signaling, muscle protein sensitivity, circulation, the activity-inactivity cycle, these aren't mysterious forces beyond your control. They're biological processes that respond to how you live. Third, be patient and consistent. The body adapts slowly, especially as we age, but it does adapt. Small efforts, sustained over time, produce meaningful results. Fourth, stay curious. Keep learning. The science of aging and muscle health is advancing all the time. What we know today is more than we knew a decade ago, and what we'll know in another decade will be greater still. Remain open to new information and new approaches. And finally, take care of yourself with the same kindness you would offer someone you love. Your body has carried you through decades of life. It deserves your patience, your understanding, and your continued investment. Thank you for spending this time with me today. I hope you found this information valuable. If you'd like to continue learning together, to explore more topics related to health and aging, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. I'll be sharing more educational content in the future, always with the goal of providing you with accurate, evidence-based information that you can actually use in your life. Until next time, take good care of yourself, move a little every day, eat well, rest well. And remember that the story isn't finished yet. There are chapters still to be written, and you have more to say about how they unfold than you might have realized. Be well.